Alright everyone, welcome back. JP the Third with you for Venus Now. And we are continuing our playthrough of Suzerain. We are fairly deep into the game now. We've done all the preliminary work. So we'll be starting, I think, our foreign policy push today, but we still got to meet the social team and everybody. So, first things first, let's meet with the Reform Committee. I came a little early to the meeting room before anybody showed up. We had scheduled a meeting to discuss the progress of the Reform Committee regarding the new Constitution. I took a seat on the Senate chair in the vacant meeting room as I waited for them to show up. The reforms were slowly becoming the most significant expectation of my government. We will be changing Saul's Constitution of 29. Most people nowadays blame the Constitution for the outstanding problems of the country. On the other hand, the reformists in the Assembly have been getting louder about their demands. What I knew for sure was that I needed to do something about this encroaching chaos before it swallowed me. Meanwhile, Lucian, Peter, and Nia have been leading the committee to prepare an initial draft for the constitutional amendments. I was intrigued to hear the results. There was a knock on the door. It was Lucian. "Good afternoon, sir." Lucian arrived exactly on the hour mark again. His punctuality could almost be described as excessive. That would make him a very good strategist and bureaucrat. I was just going to go with civil servant, but technically he's not. "Good afternoon, Lucian." He took a seat on the table and took out a bunch of documents, spreading them on the table. "We should begin the meeting as soon as Miss Morgana and Mr. Vice President arrives. We finally have some results from the Reform Committee." "What results? Like, why am I here?" "How does it look?" "Well, the situation is quite complicated, but I'm sure we will make it work, just like we accomplished many things before. We'll go over the details regarding the new Constitution in the meeting." A few minutes later, Peter and Nia also arrived. After a short chat, everybody sat down and took out their notes. I knew it was going to be a long meeting. There's a lot to talk about the future of this process. Let us begin to tackle the points of contention. Mr. President, our committee meetings were really fruitful, and we already started working on the constitutional draft together with the reformists. They demand a little too much, but I've had success with Friends Richter to create a realistic draft that could potentially go through the Supreme Court. A little? They demanded to rewrite the whole Constitution. The requests were definitely not outrageous, just not realistic in today's circumstances. If there was ever a line to describe this particular run of this particular game, that would be it. Just because it wouldn't pass the Assembly. Nonetheless, I'm glad that we are reaching common ground already. If we can reach an agreement with the reformists, we will be very strong in the Assembly to propose a change. Can we reach a 2/3 majority in the Assembly? If you can get Friends Richter to work with you on this, our only problem will be uniting our own party. We will never be able to get NFP to work with us. Screw those Nazis. We need the majority of our 130 seats in the Assembly to vote in favor. With the PFJP's full support of 70 votes, we will easily surpass the need of 166. But it would be tough to unite the USP with all the divisive wings that have formed. You must make them follow you loyally. We did it before for the elections. We can do it again. Alban Clavin and his reformist wing would be supporting you. He already weighed in heavily in the committee meetings. However, the conservatives would be tough to break. The influence of Saul is still living strong in the party. Do you really think they can be persuaded? I'm sure it's possible, but regardless of my opinion, we need to persuade most of them to support us for passing an amendment to the Constitution. And there's only one person who is key to make them back us. Gloria Torrey. She's well respected by the Solists. She'll be our biggest obstacle in the Assembly, and her demands will be extensive. I also have reasons to think she might be in Ortho's pocket. She'll be tough to break, but we'll need her help to get the conservative support. Is it possible to pass this through the Supreme Court? They are the biggest obstacle. Even if we pass the Assembly, the Chief Justice will do his best to block our amendments. We need at least 6 of the 11 judges to vote for the proposal, but Mr. Hawker has enormous influence over the judges. We should reach out to the judges in secret. Some of them might be willing to break rank to support us. They will surely support a just cause for the country and its future. Lucian looks skeptical. To put it mildly. According to the Constitution, I am a member of the Supreme Court, which means we already have one vote. 2 of the judges are friends of mine and a similar opinion about the reforms. Consider them with me. Who else would be willing to support reforms? Like, I'm gonna talk about bribing people in front of Miss Justice over here, Nia Morgna. No. I think Judge Edmonds can be persuaded, and in extension, Mr. Dalton and Mr. Merton. They weren't really blinded by the Solist ideology. Yes, those 3 don't seem to be working directly with the Chief Justice Hawker. If we can get to Isabel Edmonds, we might get the 6 votes needed. That's our best bet. What are the final demands? We should run down each of the main demands of the committee and get your input first. Mrs. Morton can explain them further. We'll start with the first red line. The new constitution will fix the loopholes regarding the president's absolute veto powers. Even though Mr. Richter put on a whole show about why vetoes should completely be removed, the committee had almost unanimously agreed on fixing the loopholes, thus limiting presidential vetoes. My suggestion is to add a clause detailing the methods the assembly may override a veto with some sort of supermajority. One person should never be able to block the rest. The loopholes give the president too much power, which could be misused. Whatever you decide, it's important to get a balanced picture. We will be making history by changing the 29th Constitution of Saul. The second one is about the judiciary. The new constitution will remove the Supreme Court's right to vote on legislation. This is yet another point that was unanimously agreed on by all parties. Tarkin Saul established this rule to protect his 29th Constitution. We all know most of the judges are still his pawns. Constitutional amendments will still be very difficult to accomplish with a reform like this, particularly because we will keep the 2/3 vote system to be able to propose a change. However, the judiciary will not have the final say in the amendments. This is already what our administration wanted to do. Yes, this will ensure that there won't be another politically motivated Supreme Court. Apart from these 2 critical points, they have other major demands. They want to reform the appointment procedures of the ministers. Mr. Richter clarified that the Assembly should have a say in the formation of the Council of Ministers. That is something that a majority in our party also supports. Well, Mr. Richter also talked about abolishing the Member of Honor rights of Tarkin Saul that gives him absolute immunity and makes him a permanent member of the Assembly. Well, that one is a controversial one. I thought the USP would like that. Immunity of the justices, the impeachment of the president, limiting the power of the presidential decrees. All of this came up during the committee meetings. Yes, reformists expect big reforms, while our faction in the USP are not very keen on pushing changes that are too great. I'd say keeping everything in the middle ground is the safest bet. No need to agitate anyone too much. They have valid concerns that we need to look at. I'll keep working with them and keep you updated, Mr. President. Well, regardless of what Mr. Rayne decides, we need to work together to push this agenda. Now we have a better picture of your intentions, sir. I'll start reaching out to my contacts to make a draft that works for us. I'll present your input to the committee. In a few months, you would have the draft on your desk to make the final changes yourself. I think this was yet another fruitful meeting, sir. If we do this, we will be remembered as heroes. That would be really great. He laughed. I think this is where we will call it, sir. Have a good day. They left the room. Alright, so we have basically the guidelines of what we want for the Constitution. I want to keep everybody kind of in the loop for now. But it's going fairly well. promising industrial potential for Conrad. Chris Shaw reports that the decision to start the construction of the L1 high-speed railway project caused industrial investors all over the country to invest money in regions near the city. Good. So we're starting to see some growth on that front. Now, construction has reported that preparatory work for the L1 railway has already started, including clearing land and transporting equipment. Construction of the railway will start in the next month from Holford. Slowly but surely. The Chief Justice wants to meet with us. The administration has been working day and night on the overwhelming amount of issues that were facing the country. The department sent several documents which required my signature so they could start working on the new decisions that were taken. After I signed dozens of them, I closed my eyes to relax for a moment. Another long day. Even though I really wished to leave the palace for the day, Lucian had earlier told me that the Chief Justice wanted to speak to me. We planned to meet in my office in 30 minutes. I waited for him, wondering what subject he would raise. Let's not push it just in case. I stretched out my arms and looked out the window. Thousands of shimmering lights in the whole sort of skyline were mesmerizing. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door. It was Lucian. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Lucian. I'm sorry that I couldn't explain the situation to you in detail earlier, sir. The Chief Justice insists on seeing you this evening. I do not know what he has to say, but it'll probably be about the new Constitution. He will be coming shortly with Judge Mr. Garasi to the meeting. We shouldn't take them lightly. I think he's here to test the waters. I agree. They'll probably try to get you to... One day my tongue will cooperate with a stream, but today is not that day. They'll probably try to get you to their side. We should. There were 3 knocks on the door. Lucian checked his watch. He looked rather worried. Livia opened the doors. Chief Justice Orso Hawker and Judge Heron Garasi entered the room. Good evening, Mr. President. It's great to see you. Evening. Welcome, Justice Garasi and Chief Justice Hawker. Good to see you indeed. Orso gestured at the sofa in the office. May I? Please. We all took our seats on the 2 opposite sofas and made ourselves comfortable. How are your first couple of months, Mr. President? I hope you're faring well. Thank you. It's very busy, but I'm doing good. It will only get busier, yet I think you're doing a good job so far. Considering all that's happening around us, with the shootings near the palace and the soldiers on our borders, he let out a deep sigh. It is a troubling time. We appreciate your concerns. So, you probably know why we are here. Please enlighten us, Mr. Hawker. We know you are working on a new constitution. The Supreme Court does not approve of this. With all due respect, the Constitution needs to be updated, sir. I'm sure you're well aware of the public demands in our circumstances. Is that so? I see that you are the one who is not aware of our actual circumstances. You want to make a weaker constitution in the midst of problems from both inside and outside. Even if your proposal passes the Assembly, I will make sure it will not pass the Supreme Court. That much is clear. You haven't even seen the proposal yet, Mr. Hawker. Isn't it too soon to be against it? Do you think I live under a rock, Mr. President? I know what goes on. Yet you, Mr. President, seems to be only partially informed of the current situation. Please let us explain the reasons for our stance. Oh? Please explain. We are protecting the Constitution because it works, Mr. President. It is efficient, and it gives you the authority to lead the nation with swift decisions. Sordland has more important problems and threats that we should face right now instead of nitpicking about some paragraphs of the Constitution. We have a potential war within our borders. Orso signaled Heron with his hand to let him speak instead. Mr. President, I know you are a busy man, so I'll make this quick. We all know that the Sworded security forces found stashes of Rumburgian weaponry in the hideouts of Blutish separatists. K-74s are roaming inside Sordland at this very moment. as much as Rumberg poses a direct threat. Now it's clear that they are also intervening in our country and weaponizing our minorities against us. It's not unprecedented to think that the Blues will start their terror again with their new toys. Not to mention the fights that broke out between the left and right wing after the shooting of Bernard Circus. Communists are rising with the support of United Cantana. The chaos is imminent for Sordland. And sadly, we don't see the administration taking the necessary precautions. You said you will not focus on the military during your term, under current circumstances that cannot be tolerated at any cost. Tolerant? You should be more careful with your choice of words. We'll remain cordial for now, but I really want to punch this dude in the face. Mr. Hawker, the court has no jurisdiction over these matters. Aren't we all part of the state, Mr. President? We are responsible if Sordland fails to overcome these threats. But regardless of that, are you also aware that the armed blooded separatists have direct connections with the Workers' Party of Bloodia? I mean, they are all Bloods. Or Bloody. The Workers' Party is a democratic party unlike the militias. They are not the same. They may claim they have no ties with the separatists, but most of their members used to be part of them before they formed the Workers' Party of Bloodia. How about the name, Mr. President? It is not the Workers' Party of Sordland, is it? As far as I'm aware, there is no nation called Bloodia around here. What is this all about? Well, the only reason they're not in the assembly is because of the electoral threshold. They have gotten quite big. They're clearly getting outside help, and their connections to the paramilitary Blues force cannot be denied. And all of a sudden, the reformers are trying to decrease the electoral threshold so that the Blues separatists can legitimize in the assembly to achieve their aims of independence. You think that's Mr. Richter's intention? I suspect his intentions are grander. But I wish the only issues were the Blues terrorists and Rumberg. The reformers suggested changes would also bring the communists, who were backed by United Cantana, into the assembly. Do you see the pattern yet? You are saying that the reformists are working for foreign powers. Haven't you been briefed by your security team? Maybe you should suspect them as well. Yeah, suspect everybody! Don't trust anybody, just us! We're the only ones not lying to you. We should take the necessary measures against communist and Blues plots, as well as increasing our military budget against a possible conflict with Rumberg. And of course, not fall into the traps of the reformers by listening to their demands. They're clearly plotting to weaken the president and our whole administration in order to exploit the situation. Which brings us to some very important information that we have. It's definitely something you need to hear, and it can change absolutely everything. With all due respect, Mr. President, I think this is getting slightly ridiculous. Lucius, speaking for the people. Please explain, Mr. Hawker. The person in question is Mr. Franz Rector, himself, the leader of the reformists. We have enough information to infer that he has ties to Arcadia. Arcadia is aggressively growing their influence around the world, and now we have Mr. Richter coming up with these ridiculous demands for a new constitution amidst a chaotic period of Sordland. All the pieces seem to fit perfectly. That is why the Supreme Court will be doing what it takes to stop these reforms and preserve the Constitution. How would you know that Mr. Richter has ties to Arcadia? Mr. Glade, we all know he has been in Arcadia many times, because it's been documented. But what would you think if he has been making hitting flights to the country? I need to know this. Please explain. He has been spotted in a hotel in Arcadia last year, where they had held the conference on economic development in volatile regions. Right around that time, he started to influence the masses into believing that our Constitution is the reason for everything bad. His trip was not documented, nor was he an official guest at the conference. We believe he had a president. We believe he had a president. Wow. We believe he had a meeting with President Walker behind closed doors. I also have a couple more photos of him that were taken in Arcadia in different cities. One from a couple of months back. Again, none of it is documented. He also attended another event in Lesbia last week. The Arcadian Minister of Foreign Affairs was there too. How did you find out about this? Many Solids were already following his lead for quite some time, Mr. President. I cannot give away their identities, but I can give you the evidence. Well, we do know a solid at the Ministry of Internal Affairs that will be keeping track of citizens, so it's not that hard of a leap. He handed me a small file. It contained official documents from the Swordlish Board of Guard with highlighted dates that showed no trace of Prince Richter's name. There are clear photos of him that were taken in the conference in Arcadia, as well as remarks by lesbian and Arcadian citizens who claimed to have seen him with Arcadian businessmen around the same dates. There was also an official transcript of one of his speeches where he claimed to be in Benfey on the dates of the conference in Arcadia, where he was spotted. Lucian skimmed through the documents with skepticism, which slowly turned into surprise. These seem to be real. Of course they're real, Mr. Gallade. These seem to suggest that Arcadia is behind these reformists. Their demands will only benefit Arcadia. They want us to have a weaker administration while we face all these threats. This is clearly a plot against Sordland. I bet Rumburg is part of their plan too. This cannot be a coincidence that they are weaponizing our minorities around us at the same time. It's a complete and total coincidence. Now you understand the reasons of our current stance, and also our suspicions about your advisors, who clearly are not giving you this vital information. Lucian gave him a sharp look. We appreciate the information, Mr. Hawker, but I advise against jumping to conclusions right away. We still need to check the information. There is not much to think or check. This is clearly an emergency. In such cases, the Constitution gives the President the right to use his emergency powers. If we work together, you can be sure that the Supreme Court will not block your declaration of emergency. You want me to declare an emergency? Of course. We cannot wait for the processes of the Assembly to take care of these issues. You must exercise your presidential powers for a fast and effective solution. Which means you might need to suspend parts of the Constitution to give more authority to our security forces to deal with these issues. We must officially investigate Mr. Richter as well. You can devise a strong security decree if you base it on You can devise a strong security decree if you can base it on the Articles 57 and 58, which gives the President on Articles 57 and 58, which gives the President the right to suspend parts of the Constitution to deal with national security threats. You can also directly bypass the Assembly in such situations. The only thing you need is the Supreme Court to allow the emergency to be declared, and you have our word on that. Sir, I think that's going a bit too far. We shouldn't escalate things so fast. Mr. President, why don't we talk in private? Only the two of us. How about we not? We can devise a plan together. I know how we can use the Constitution to our advantage. It'll be more effective if Mr. Gallade and Mr. Garazzi leave the room before we discuss it. Sir, I advise against it. Yeah, like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, yeah, they're funding communist minority groups because they want a more capitalist country? I mean, no. The scheme doesn't even make sense. But see, that's just the excuse. If you wanted to go into the autocratic realm, this is another step you would take. You'd have to work with the Supreme Court to issue an emergency declaration to give yourself more power. It's the quickest way to do it without actually reforming the Constitution. So if you just wanted to be an autocrat, now would be the time. But yeah, it's just that's really how easy it is. You really don't need too much. Just a couple of strands tied together that can kind of sort of make sense, and boom, you have a dictatorship. It's really kind of scary, especially with everything that's happened this year. Kind of scary. I'm sorry to say we won't be cooperating, Mr. Hawker. Even though you are aware of our national security threats, you're making a big mistake, Mr. President. We will not allow you to succeed. Gentlemen, I think it's about time to end this meeting. Well, thank you for having us, Mr. President. Have a good evening. They both left the room without saying anything else. That was not good. They clearly tried to threaten you. We have to make sure our reforms will pass the court. Or so we'll be doing whatever it takes to damage you. We need to be careful. There's still many old guard sympathizers in our party. We can't let them divide our party. And he will definitely try. After a short evaluation of the situation on our hands, Lucian left me in the presidential office. It was obvious that the old guards would be my main rivals in the near future. And they will. Luckily for us, they're corrupt as all hell, so if we put the proper mechanisms in place, we can put them in check. But they're not going to make it easy. Ottoman times, Harkin the Maroon Palace, Chief Justice Oso Hako has been spotted entering the Maroon Palace. Our sources are intrigued by the timing of this visit, as it is happening right after the increased conversation around the so-called democratic reforms. Yeah, because the people don't know what's coming yet on our reforms, so they don't know what we're planning. Right, to the next turn. Trials of Democracy. Just letting it load here, I guess. There you go. Took a minute there. Alright, let's check the paper. Well, let's check the reports first. Recession hits farmers again. Part of the latest news from lack of in the farming industry has taken another hit. 16% loss. That's bad. Young Swords. A massive counter protest against the Young Swords led by a politician known to be aligned with the Red Youth resulted in many injuries and property damage. Tensions are still spiraling. Need to put that in check. Both of them are causing problems. Brutish resistance and sanctuary security units have arrested 3 priests at 2 different Nurity sanctuaries in Sarna after finding links to insurgent activities. Problems. Norbel reports lack of hospitals. We'll have to do something about that. Communist books burned in Board. Not sectarian, but political violence continues. The political threats continue. School poisoning in Ribble. Police have arrested the principal of a high school in Ribble in the southern Bergia, where 12 students died after eating a free meal laced with pesticide. Jesus. The students aged between 15 and 17 died after eating a lunch of local dish of zabla cooked at the school in a poverty-stricken city. Police have started the investigation to solve the mystery of how the pesticide ended up in the food. Jesus. Time for women to stand up. Pushing for more women's rights. I'll just read the relevant parts. It is time for Sordland to realize that we have to respect every individual regardless of their sex and strive to become an advanced civilization. Women have long been pushed to the corners of the social and political life. To address this change, a new campaign has started all over Sordland to establish a framework for women's rights. Sordland League of Women is organizing rallies with the support of the Minister of Education, Ciara Walda, a member of the Assembly, Katarina Horton. Everybody is equal according to the Sordland Constitution, but there are no protections against discrimination, which only reinforces the inequality in practice, said Walda at a press conference. This movement must be supported by all Sordland women as well as men. We need to bring change now. We can do it. Questioning Sordland education. The newly unveiled SIPA Education Performance Report unveiled a sad reality about Sordland's abysmal status in comparison to many countries. Sordland was ranked 39th out of the 68 nations that were assessed by the OMEC organization. The primary gauge of the quality of education is made up from a sample of 60-year-olds from each nation and their capacity in fields like mathematics, history, chemistry, and many others. One of the key issues was seen as a strong focus on history and citizenship classes, leaving little time for scientific fields. Minister Walda often mentioned the gaps in the system in her assembly debates before she joined the cabinet. This is also supported by one of our editors, a professor from Holsworth State, who has long been critical of the situation in secondary education. The SIPR report reveals the damning truth that solid education, based on the principle of statism, nationalism, republicanism, poisons the bright minds of our children. We need to rid the system from the poison that is ideological indoctrination. Let our future generations think for themselves. I agree with that in theory. In practice, it's going to be harder than they are making it out to be. Upcoming government budget changes at the top. Economic experts of the country, we have been watching the upcoming changes to the government budget closely. President Anton Rayne's first internal economic challenge lies ahead, and we will see if he can prove his capabilities as a leader who can think ahead. Yeah. Van Horten blames Volkland for their missing fishing vessel. Lovely. That conflict's heating up. Tuesday morning, Magnolia's Prime Minister Van Horten made a statement denouncing Volkland for their missing vessel, hull number ARVO 238. Our dutiful Coast Guards have rescued a crew member of the missing vessel. Through his statement, we have learned the ship's unfortunate end was none other than the Volkslandian Navy. However, the Prime Minister has refused to disclose the surviving crew member due to fear of an assassination attempt from Volksland to cover up their hostility. It's not cooling down over there, that's for sure. Oh! This may be my favorite scene in the entire game. BBQ with Franc. It was a Saturday afternoon, my first break from work in what felt like years, and the weather couldn't have been more perfect. Trying to keep my mind off the upheaval sparked by the circus assassination, I lit my backyard grill. Monica and Deanna were out shopping for craft supplies, and I had given the staff the day off. It was just myself and Franc at home. I wasn't sure how he felt about me at the moment, but I didn't know how he felt about barbecued ribs. Our cook had left some marinating in the refrigerator. Sure enough, as soon as Franc glimpsed the grill and the meat, he stepped outside to join me. Come to spend some quality time with your old man, have you? Sure, if you can spare a few minutes out of your busy schedule. Children who talk back to their fathers don't get dinner. We're continuing with our parental strategy as well as our political strategy. I'm sorry. I know I haven't been around very often lately, but I am happy to see you now. It's okay. I know you got the most stressful job in the country, and you've got to feed your family on top of it all. We both chuckled. I turned the tent to the fire. Here, let me try. He grabbed the fan and started quickly waving it over the coals. The fire wore to life. He turned to look at me with a grin on his face, as if he was expecting praise. Don't act like you're something special. Like you could be such a dick. You could just be a terrible father if you just wanted to. We'll go neutral. Not bad, son. Not bad. Thank you, sir. It is in our utmost interest to fulfill our duties with precision. The grilling shall commence in exactly 1 minute and 32 seconds. That was a spot-on impression of Lucian. We both looked at each other for a second, then burst out laughing. I realized my throat was parched. There was a 6-pack of beer in the kitchen. Why don't you bring us a couple of beers? He looked at me in disbelief. You mean, I can't... But Mom told me... He stopped himself, quickly ran inside and returned with 2 beers. We cracked them open, clinking the bottles, and gazed out at the city skyline. That scene right there, that part of the scene right there is just my favorite thing. Because it's clearly like, wait, you're letting me do what? For a moment, my thoughts flashed back to my childhood and my relationship with my own father. My father was a hard-working man and always had our best interest in mind. Or at least, that's what he always said. But he had a temper. And would lash out at my mother in fights that I could hear from my bedroom. By the time I was Franc's age, we seldom spoke. Now that I was the president, I was facing more stress than my father ever had. I would have to work hard not to take my frustrations out with my family. On my family, excuse me. Dad, can I ask you something? We're a family. You can ask anything. It's just, I feel like there's so much you've been hiding from me. About your past, and about what's going on right now. Like at dinner that night after the ball, you told me everything was under control, but it wasn't, was it? I know what happened in the 20s. We learned all about it in school. Now, with the protests and wrong inflection. Now, with the protests and the riots, it's going to be the same thing? Is it going to be the same thing? Dad, is there going to be a civil war in Sordland? Let's be honest. I hope not. He let out a sigh. But what was it like back then? Uncle Peter said that the two of you went through a lot. I'm not a kid anymore. You can tell me. Before I could gather my thoughts, the familiar images started flashing before my eyes. Images of soldiers advancing towards me and my friends, weapons drawn, of people I knew, friends and neighbors, being dragged through the streets and murdered in alleyways. The shock and grief on the face of fathers, mothers, and orphan children. Those were dark times. It seems like it. But you are nearly a grown man. Let's talk about it. Franc leaned forward in his chair, his eyes wide. It's time to tell him about the coup of 1927. I was barely older than you are now, studying economics at the Lockerbie Business School. I was a freshman, excited and young. I had just left the classroom to go back home, and I heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the campus gates. As they got closer, I realized they were military camouflage trucks and tanks, carrying hundreds of soldiers. Same soldiers that were supposed to protect Sordland citizens pointed their guns at us. They immediately took control of the facilities. One of my friends asked what was going on and was arrested immediately. More people got angry and gathered in protest. Franc kept listening, a shocked look on his face. He wanted to know, so let's not hold anything back. I was there with the protesters as they declared martial law. We marched towards them. They threatened to use force, but we stood our ground, so they started beating anyone they saw, including me. The physical wounds took a few weeks to heal, but the mental scars have stayed with me to this day. I was still one of the lucky ones. Some of my friends were shot. Many more were arrested. I can't forget the screams to this day. Franc leaned back in his chair. His shoulders slumped heavily. It was time to tell him about the Civil War. It was right after that I met your mother. We have both joined the same human rights group to push for change after the coup of 27. But over the next year, the state of Sordland deteriorated. People started picking sides. I tried to stay away as much as I could. Then one night it happened. Two different factions in the army, one of them led by fascist General Lunarin and the other by socialist General Rickard, started fighting against each other. It was a bloodbath. Nowhere was safe. Franc shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Hey kid, you want to know all this. People organized protests either for or against Rickard. I heard about this clash just the next day. Many of my friends were shot or arrested. I isolated myself for months. That's enough for today. It's okay. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked you about it. I know I don't understand how easy my life is sometimes. One more thing though. I know that you managed not to take any sides. Do you mind if I ask why? There are different options, but this is the truth. They are two sides of the same coin. Franc raised his eyes, his curiosity still not satisfied, but sensing my reluctance to go on, he simply nodded. Sorry for bombarding you with questions. I know I complain sometimes, but my problems are nothing compared to what you went through. You're damn right. Your generation will never understand. I'm here to listen to them, no matter what they are. Before Franc could say anything else, I heard the front door unlock. Deanna and Monica's voices and the sound of rustling shopping bags filled the house. Alright, I'll be upstairs until dinner. Franc went in and dashed upstairs. I took a long sip from my beer, looking at the city and the now setting sun. I hope that talking to Franc about my path had been the right decision. Part of me felt as if some burden had been lifted. But I had the same nightmares again that night. That is just such a well-written scene. Reports, prisoners right in Anton Rayne prison. Yesterday around 11 a.m. a prison run started in Ward C of the Anton Rayne prison, which was eventually suppressed. Ward C is generally known for keeping political prisoners, and the riot started when a warden was killed by a brutish political prisoner. Tension. USP reports on reforms. Many members of the USP, led by Alban Clavin and the reformist wing of the party, clarified their demands from the government in the party Congress. For the upcoming constitutional reform, Alban Clavin stated that without ministry reforms, they won't be able to stand behind the new reform package. Underhaul Construction's project manager for the L1 Railway has reported that the project has been progressing well, and they have already started laying down the foundations of the ground retaining walls, bridges, and tracks. Good. Everything's going according to schedule. The mayor Warner reported that their industrial output numbers this year are 12% lower than last year. They're requesting additional support to improve their industrial capacity, including machinery. Excuse me. Oh, I had a little moment there. They're lost and sound. Let's just leave it at that. Also, Parth attacker opened fire on protesters, 17 dead. This has got to stop. The man opened fire in the Vesor city center during a protest march organized by the Communist Party of Sordland against the murder of Bernard Circus. He took out the weapon from the newsstand at the square, brandished it, and yelled, "Come, I will give you freedom," one witness said. The highly charged word freedom was previously associated with blue separatists, but has been used widely during the previous months of protests against the murder of Bernard Circus. Minister of Interior Lillian Graff said that she had spoken with the chief of Versailles Police and asked him to take strict action. The government will not tolerate any such incident, and the perpetrators will not be spared. One of the most anticipated matches between Guildford and Enrica was postponed because of the intense protest in the city of Enrica. The league had issued the following statement regarding the situation. Due to safety reasons, the players are compromised during the time of the trouble. We have decided to propose the game. Moreover, we stand in solidarity with our fans, our players, and the people of Enrica in the fight against injustice. Mayor Curtin Left also made a statement. It's tragic day in Sordland where the president himself refused to act in the face of communism. It is said that inaction breeds down in fear. Thus, I fear that the threat of communism has sown deeper into the heart of the nation than we thought. Deeper inside the heart of the nation than we thought. However, I and the people of Enrica will never stop fighting for the soul of our great country. Undemocratic elections. They're talking about the threshold. You have to get 10% of the national vote in order to be admitted into parliament. This is one where I actually agree with the radical. That is very undemocratic. We should at least try and get the threshold down a bit. I was traveling to the snow-covered city of Narrabell in the Nargis region for the Rural Development Forum organized by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. The mountainous city of Narrabell had a gritty tones to it. It was mostly regarded as one of the poorest cities in Sordland. Its people were hardy and wary. Even after the discovery of natural resources in the area, years of neglect by the central government were apparent on the buildings and the general infrastructure. Natural resources, namely gas and oil, were now under the control of Gasson, which elevated the corporation to a place of power. Or Gasson. My task in the forum was mainly symbolic, fake smiles and handshakes with oil barons, meeting with local politicians, but most importantly of all, to make sure that Narrabell doesn't feel like it was forgotten by the government. The scenery so far, however, was a reflection of Narrabell's neglect. Main roads to the city were not maintained well. There were many bumps and empty, discolored spots in the asphalt. Navigating and swerving to avoid the inconveniences, our motorcade finally started nearing the city. As if my discomfort from the bumpy ride was apparent to him, Sergei rolled down the partition window. "We'll be arriving at Hotel West in 5 minutes, sir. In a few minutes, sir." "Thank you for letting me know. Any time, it's my duty." After a moment, Sergei started to smile underneath his mustache. "How is life, Sergei?" "Sir, I just wanted to say, it has been great these last 2 months. As you know, my wife Susan recently gave birth to our son, sir, and now my daughter just started at a very good high school in Hosselen." "That's great news, Sergei. I'm happy for you." "I appreciate it, sir. Truly, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to afford a good private school if she scored less in the entrance exams. But I shouldn't have made my insecurity get to me. Erica outsmarts me all the time. I'm very proud to have a daughter like her." "I too hope that Diana will grow to be like her mother someday." "I'm sure she will, sir. After all, she is the daughter of a lion and a lioness." My daughter looks up to the First Lady for inspiration, and it's not just limited to my daughter, sir. She is an inspiration for almost all women in this country. But at the same time, it must be hard for the First Lady as well. All this attention, adjusting to the new high-profile life, and a husband that has great responsibility. You're alright. It is hard for her. It must be, sir. We sometimes forget the important people in life between all the responsibility and rush. You know, those we care for. I agree. Thurgood continued after a moment of silence. Have I told you, sir? We named our son George. The doctor said he's very healthy, and thankfully so is my wife. Tell me more about Susan. What kind of person is she? She has a good heart. Her family comes from Sarna, so they are a little more traditional. I really like her selflessness. Selflessness is a respectable trait to have. It should be mutual. That is what matters most, Sergei sighed. I already started thinking about their university education, especially Erica. I want to send her to a good private school, but with the current state of the economy, it's going to be hard on us. Now, this is an interesting choice. Like, depending on how the game goes, you either want to be Sergei's really, really good friend, or you can afford to keep him at a respectable length. Knowing that because we made the earlier investments we made, we have plenty of money. We're good. So I don't mind being charitable in this moment. You know what? I can pay for the education of your children. Mr. President, there's no way I can... With one look from me, Sergei cut his sentence short and nodded to me after removing his hat. Mr. President, I don't know how I can ever repay you for this. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I hope you return the favor by helping someone in need someday, just like I did. I will, sir, of course. I think I have decided. I will give your name to my boy, George Anton Waltner. May he go strong like you are. I'm sure he will. The car hit a major pothole and a bump, which lifted us out of our seats for a second, ruining this moment. Are you fine? Yes, sir. I hope the car is fine, too. This is unacceptable. That's what I should have said. But we won't be able to invest in the infrastructure in the region for a minute, so we might as well not lie to anybody. The Hotel West was supposedly the best hotel in Narwhal. The large 25-story main building was undoubtedly one of the taller and more expensive buildings in the city. It towered over the nearby slums and had been a target for protests when it was first built. A crowd was gathered in front of the hotel with the welcoming committee at its center. As we approached the red carpeted entrance, I could see the mayor of Narwhal and his top aides. Sergei got out of the car and opened the door. He bowed his head respectfully and gestured towards the entrance. Thank you. Have a good day, Mr. President. As soon as I left the vehicle, the fresh air of Narwhal filled my lungs. Almost immediately, everyone present in the crowd flocked over to me with an excessive display of courtesy, smiles, and handshakes while I donned the mask of a politician, a mask that I was very used to. Alright. We still have an event there. Let's go through some of these. Protests appear calmer after the protests continue nationwide. Tension eases in some cities. Still, several major cities, including Dire and Lockhaven, did have scattered reports of violence Monday night. Tens of thousands died. Circus Hotel walked in a memorial march, though police moved in on the thinning crowd after the evening settled, making arrests. Shocking misogynistic rally, according to the Radical. Every day we are appalled by how deeply the roots of misogyny goes in our country. We are appalled again when yesterday, during a protest by the Swedish League of Women, counter-protesters showed up to disrupt the peaceful rally. In the resulting scuffle between the police and the protesters and the mob, many were arrested from both sides. Road to change is filled with real obstacles, but we said it before, we can do it. And they want Saul to answer for his crimes. Education privatization proved successful. Our editorial team immediately analyzed the SIPA report, recently revealed to such the standards of education. We were curious to see how the policies of the last decade have begun changing the performance metrics. Lesbia specifically stood out with a jump of 6 position points forward to the 5th out of 68. After research and analysis collaboration with the Vice President of Magnus Cartus and the SMEA chapter leader of OMEC, we gained critical insight to how Lesbia increases educational quality. It boils down to 2 major points. One is the privatization effort led by Prime Minister Alvarez that led to most schools in wealthier neighborhoods, 1,404 to be precise, to be privatized. This lifted a significant budget burden off the state because the wealthy paid for a great education for their kids and were still taxed reasonably in order to divert funds to state schools elsewhere. The second major factor was the allowance of minor curricular changes for private institutions that led to major improvements in the student participation, teacher happiness, and boosted the performance of the institutions. All in all, the improvements to the system and the massive amount of 34 billion lira it raised for Lesbia made it a lucrative option. Sordland desperately needs more capital to tackle the recession, and when education is privatized, foreign capital will also aid in establishing quality schools. The Vice President of Magnus Cartus pointed out that the SIPA report doesn't include access to education metrics, and that Lesbia has inequality problems. A statement that hasn't been proven with any statistical research from the OMEC, or I've been calling it OMEC, which is why it must be taken with a pinch of salt. The Rayne administration could be practical about this term and look to the Southern example on how to do a positive change, even though opposition from the... I was just thinking, wait, the Minister of... Walda. Of course, we're talking about Sierra Walda. The Rayne administration could be practical about this term and look to the Southern example on how to do positive change, even though opposition from the Minister of Education is expected. Because she's a socialist. She is a hardcore socialist. Yeah, despite reports, the political violence isn't exactly calming. PFJP reports on reforms. First Rector leader of the PFJP recently outlined their demands for the reform package. She declared that without the implementation of term limits and limited decrees, it would be very difficult for him and his party to stand behind the reform package. That's easy enough to deliver. And this is just me pledging that I'll pay for surrogates for children's education. All right. Just checking the clock here. I think we can get our meeting with the social team done in this one. The economy, look at, man. Hopefully, we're halfway done with the high-speed rail project. That'll unlock other projects, and we'll also get some privatization going. And hopefully that will help some things. Because we've really got to turn this around. But let's meet with the social team, and after that, we'll call it a day. I arrived at the meeting room for my talk with Sar and Pascal. Before beginning, I took a moment to appreciate the view from the balcony. The mountains of Norway was completely covered in snow. While I was mesmerized by the scenery, Pascal Benawal walked up to me. My Minister of Health was, ironically, somewhat portly, having gained a few pounds since his breakthrough as a best-selling writer, but his authority on social affairs could not be questioned. Such a spectacular view. Sierra Walda, the Minister of Education, joined us on the balcony dressed in a sky blue pantsuit. Her preference for trousers over dresses had made her the subject of much palace gossip, but it didn't seem to bother her in the slightest. Spectacular indeed, but if you look in the opposite direction, you will see what Saul's decades of neglect did to the city. Most of the people living in Narble are workers, farmers, and their wives and children. They're breaking their backs for close to no pay, all thanks to greedy corporations. Whatever. I'd much rather be a hostile right now. We can't really blame the companies. That's just how they work. Yes, we can. Similar companies are doing much better for their workers in United Cantana and Arcadia. If you look past the view, you can see the real problems. Real problems like poverty. Pascal nodded gravely. This was a subject he knew quite well about himself. His best-known books were about the plight of Sordland's less fortunate, drawn from his own past growing up in squalor. Well put, Miss Walda. I don't need to tell you about my own experience with property. I'm sure you have similar stories. Am I right, Mr. President? We knew less fortunate families, even though we belong to the middle class ourselves. So you could at least sympathize with the plight of these people. You don't have to have been born poor to sympathize with the plight of the impoverished. Much as you don't have to have been born a woman to recognize Sordland's need for parity among the sexes. Parity among the sexes shouldn't be our first priority. Look at how many high-ranking female politicians our country has. Appearances can be deceiving, Pascal. That is a good way to address kind of like the trade-off here. We have a lot of female politicians and judges and business people, but that doesn't necessarily mean the situation is still fair. Her voice sounded bitter. Think about how Lilius Graff got to her current position. I don't necessarily believe the rumors about her and Saul. Wow! Tell us what you really think. Well, she could never have risen so high if she didn't parrot his cause. Gloria Tory, is it an accident that the first female assembly speaker is such a staunch conservative? Well, we are a conservative party. And then there was Alfonso's habit of promoting women to prominent positions to give Sordland a progressive sheen while accomplishing nothing in reality. While women in places like Narble are denied any opportunity to advance, the government can use a handful of female politicians from wealthy families, myself included, well, at least she's honest, to pretend that their only obstacle to success is their own lack of initiative. Meanwhile, those of us who don't use our clout to help powerful men stay in power are denigrated as angry spinsters. I ask you, Mr. President, does anyone care that your strategist, Mr. Gallade, doesn't have a wife? I have been wondering about that, actually. No, we're not going to do our boy like that. Like, nah, Lucian has been too cool to us to be gossiping behind his back when he's not in the room. Well, this is the safest way out. I agree with you completely. Sordland's women deserve better. I'm glad to hear that. As I was saying, we gotta offer Lucian a very lot. Dude, leave our friend alone. Like, he's been too loyal for us to just talk like that about him. Way too loyal. As I was saying, isn't it about time Host would address this country's real issues, rather than bow to the wishes of the hawks and the fearmongers in the establishment, and diverting yet more resources to the military and law enforcement? Our welfare, healthcare, and education systems have been decaying since the recession. Sordland's poor communities are losing hope. Hopelessness and a lack of opportunity can drive people to extreme solutions. We're seeing increased crime, domestic violence, and yes, rising inequality between men and women. If only we could stop the recession, create jobs, growth. Those issues must be tackled from different directions. We need to engage in it holistically. I'm planning to help by using an increased budget to improve the quality of healthcare. That could prove useful, but we need to be doing a lot more. Education has similar issues. There's another subject I want to mention. I've been working on improving the rights of workers in our country and have proposed a draft bill that is currently being reviewed by our party. Mr. Clavin has already backed me and given his support. Sordland has fallen behind most countries on this subject, and it is my responsibility to ensure this is not the case. There's always room for improvement, and it's good to hear you are pushing for it. Appreciate the kind words, Mr. President. I will not let you down. And it's also a matter of life and death. Every decade we hear of some horrific accident due to employers' disregard for their workers' safety. So, would you back the bill when it arrives on your desk, Mr. President? I'll be very interested in supporting once it is finished. I am relieved to hear this. He smiled. It's getting a little cold out here. Let's head inside and continue our discussions. We headed back inside. The meeting room was already prepared for state business. Small gifts for each of us had been placed on the table by the municipality. We take our seats. Let's start with your health overview, Pascal. As you wish, Mr. President. Sordland has a free healthcare system except for a few private hospitals operating under it. Most of the populace receive adequate treatment. Health issues primarily appear in rural areas due to lack of quality service. I'm doing my best to ensure that citizens of all ages receive the best health care they can. I also personally want to solve the high infant and maternal mortality problem. How many doctors and nurses are employed? We have 31,594 doctors and 73,680 nurses working for the Ministry of Health. This is a high number. What I think is, I don't want to be rude, but out of those numbers, how many are in urban and rural areas? Good point, Sir Pascal. The data shows that per 10,000 people in urban areas, there are about 11 doctors, while in rural areas, there are only 3. That's an extraordinary disparity. Treatment time is still too high due to the low numbers of doctors in rural areas, which get barely any proper coverage. How many hospital beds are there per 10,000 citizens? There are 10 beds per 2,000 citizens, which is a very good number according to our comparisons with our neighbors. We see a lower number in the countries of Agnolia and Valen, but obviously can't match Lesbia or Vulcan. Agnolia and Valen are hardly countries to take as a standard, but it is good to know we aren't in a huge health crisis yet. What's the life expectancy and mortality rates? Our life expectancy is 65 years, and the infant mortality rate is a worrying 85% per 1,000 births. Yeah, that's really bad. While our maternal mortality is at 90 per 1,000. Be assured we are doing everything we can to save mothers and their newborn. Those numbers are saddening indeed. I agree. We must do everything we can. We are working very hard on improving the quality of our services. Thank you, Pascal. Your in-depth briefing is much appreciated. I want to hear about the education system. With pleasure. She's been waiting on this all day. Swordlish education is free, but we have a very outdated system that I want to reform. The other important issue is the lack of access to the education in rural areas, especially for young girls. Your administration has the power to solve both problems. My highest priority is to get enough funding to be able to build schools in rural areas while I cleanse our educational system of its nationalistic indoctrination and sexist teachings. How many students and teachers do we have? Currently, there are about 5 million students, 3 million in primary education, 1 million in secondary, and 1 million in tertiary. There are 155,316 teachers. Sordland is full of young and bright minds. It is indeed, and indeed is, full of potential. I think there needs to be a change in the way of thought. We should help children to question and educate themselves. What is the literacy rate of Sordland? The literacy rate of Sordland is at 80%. This is a very good indicator for future growth, but it needs to increase. It is also far lower among girls than boys. If I remember correctly, the most illiterate areas are Berger and Agland. That is correct, although Lockerbie skews the statistics for the Nargis region, which also has a vast number of illiterate citizens. This underlines my point about the lack of access to education. Tell me about the difference between urban and rural education. Urban areas have 3 times the number of schools per 10,000 people compared to rural areas. Rural areas also suffer from a lack of teachers. That's not a very good ratio. The situation is worse than expected. This is one of the most important problems we face, if not the most important. A huge part of the population is forgotten in terms of welfare. Thank you, Sarah. I can fill the blanks from here. I believe that is everything. Sarah stood up and moved towards the window. She took a deep breath. What is this, CR? Look at this impoverished city. The streets are full of potholes, the hospital is barely functioning, the school is half open. This is not just about Sala or even Alfonso failing. This decay in Sordland's forgotten regions has been going on for many decades due to the structural corruption which is fueled by capitalism. Lady, don't make me have you shot. Let's not get into an ideological debate. We need to focus on issues. One cannot be separated from the other, Mr. Rayne. The issues stem from the ideology. So I sat back down and sighed. One way or another, we need to transform. Greed and unchecked capitalism will not magically provide for the people. Tell me more about your plans, CR. My plans require an increase in the government budget. I aim to solve the problems we highlighted with the allocated money. By building schools in these less fortunate rural areas and through fundamental changes to the education system, I will unlock the potential of our children, boys and girls alike. Improving the situation in rural areas is indeed a good idea. The investment will be the future of Sordland. Imagine the untapped potential of our youth unlocked, the knowledge and wealth they will generate. Wouldn't the promotion of private education help create additional funds? Yes, but at what cost? I'm not a supporter of the private sector in education. You're not a supporter of the private sector at all. Because at the end of the day, they are focused on profit first. What are you working towards, Pascal? I personally want to improve the low quality of healthcare in the rural areas. So I created draft plans to increase the salary of doctors and to upgrade the equipment of the hospitals. I can do more with an increased budget. Additionally, a privatization plan to promote private investments in the healthcare system could allocate extra funds. Isn't access to healthcare in rural areas an issue? Access is an issue, but not as critical as the quality in these areas. The lack of experienced personnel or equipment causes bad treatment, resulting in many deaths. I do hope to create competition and increase the quality of healthcare with the privatization effort. See, he's like, at the most extreme, he's a social democrat, but really, it's two capitalists and a socialist trying to figure out welfare. That may actually be the title of this video. A private healthcare system would increase the price of treatment and make access worse for the average citizen. The decision not to promote more state control will cost the people dearly. My expectation from the government is that we understand and focus on the needs of the people. We are elected representatives of our people, and we will prioritize their needs. That's reassuring to hear. I don't want to sound cynical, but almost all governments keep making the same promises. We must show we are different through our actions. I think we covered all the necessary subjects. Thank you for your time. I do hope we won't be repeating the same mistakes again and again. Have a good day, Mr. President. The ministers left and I attended other official business in the city. The weather was relatively cold, but it didn't keep a group of USP supporters from coming out to cheer at us on the streets. Just by looking at the citizens' attire, it was easy to understand the current state of Narble. Some people were wearing clothes a few sizes too large. Some kids didn't even have shoes. Yet there was hope in their eyes. They were excited to see their president in the city. We have got a lot of work to do. Alright, so that was our social affairs team. Young source member found decapitated. Jesus. The Upstart Police Department has found a decapitated body in an abandoned house where the victim was later identified as Kruk Lenke, a high school teacher and member of the local Young Source Cultural Center. The victim was discovered to be tortured with hot wrought irons before his tongue was cut off. Jesus. It's still getting, like, yeah, a mine disaster. A coal mine has, I was just talking about this. The coal mine has collapsed in Morble. Emergency response teams were dispatched immediately. Due to the sheer size of the disaster, additional manpower and supplies were requested from nearby cities. An initial investigation shows that an underground fire team has started due to the neglect. Excuse me, not an underground fire team. An underground fire has started due to the neglect in working situations by the Nedum mining group. The current death toll is at 82 and counting. Jesus. Alright. So we'll deal with we'll go back to the office and deal with those issues and legislation in a moment. Not in a moment, in the next video. And we still have a budget meeting and we coming up and reforms and everything else we have to do. But we're moving right along. The economy is not doing so hot and the budget is barely hanging on. But hopefully once we finish the railway and get rolling on a few other projects, Pascal mentioned privatization. That's going to be a big push for us since we are filthy centrist and capitalist over here, despite what CRR would like us to be. So hopefully that'll generate more income, create jobs, and if all goes to plan, we're going to be all right. It's just a little rough right now. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so, and check out vmsnow.com. That is vmsnow.com, where I really need to actually stick to a schedule. Like, I'll get there one day. It's something that you have to learn. I'm getting there. See y'all in the next one.